Hello, everybody. Happy Monday. Jillian Sakovits here with you. A very warm welcome to Full-Time Review. As always, it is presented by Amazon Prime. The name Marie-Louise Eta, does that ring a bell? She's a trailblazing head coach who became the first woman to lead a men's soccer team in Europe's top 5 leagues when she took charge of Union Berlin in Germany's Bundesliga as an interim for the first time for 3 games back in 2024, and then again more permanently this past season. On the show today, we're going to be getting into Eta's journey from Champions League winning player to trailblazing head coach and why she swapped Union Berlin men for the women's team this past summer. We'll be joined by the Athletic's Megan Feringa, who spent 4 days in Berlin with Eta and the Union to learn more about her coaching style, who she is, and what she means to this unique club on the outskirts of the German capital. With the NWSL season in full swing, the action on the pitch has been absolutely relentless. Between tracking the table standings and planning watch parties, life moves fast. When sudden match day plans pop up, you can't afford to be caught flat-footed. That's why Amazon Prime is an absolute game changer. It lets you say yes to the moments that matter most without missing kickoff. Need new fanware before a massive rivalry match? Some last-minute pitchside gear for your weekend league? Or just a massive snack delivery because the whole crew is coming over before the broadcast? Prime has you covered. Because it's not just about getting things fast, it's about making sure you're ready for 90 minutes plus stoppage time completely stress-free. Same-day delivery, it's on Prime. Available in select areas, terms apply. Go to Amazon.com/Prime to find millions of items delivered fast so you're always match day ready. Now, let's get you back to the show. And from Berlin to Liverpool, all in the course of the weekend, we bring in now Megan Feringa. Hi, Megan.
Hi, Jillian.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm off of, like you said, 4 days in Berlin, which was amazing. Food was good. Weather was okay. Football was more amazing. It was a good time.
Okay, so I want to unpack all of that, and we're going to start with, this is for our listeners that are unfamiliar. Who is Marie-Louise Eta? Why would someone recognize this name?
Yeah, so people might recognize this name because she is the first woman to have ever coached a men's first team in the top flight of one of Europe's top 5 leagues. You probably heard of her because this happened back in April of this year. And yeah, it turned into sort of an international firestorm of a story. Like this sort of small little town, this suburb outside of Berlin, if you will, Köpenick, with like, international media descended on this place because this was such a big deal that a woman was going to be managing this team in the Bundesliga, Germany's top flight, for the first time. She took over after the manager who was there had been sacked. They'd only had 2 wins in 14 games, and there was some threat of relegation going on. And yeah, so she took over, and I think a lot of people will recognize that name as being this very sort of historic name associated with breaking such an incredible ceiling, and not just like, just in general in football. But she has a huge backstory, and we'll get into it. And this was a long time in the making. But the reason I was in Berlin was because Marie-Louise Eta is now the head coach of the women's team of Union Berlin. And it was her first game on Friday at Union Berlin Stadium. So that's why I was there, but that's why you might recognize the name.
Yeah, and it's been a fascinating journey up until this point. Can you kind of walk us through that?
Yeah, so Marie-Louise Eta was a German football player herself. She's won the Champions League twice. She's won the Frauen-Bundesliga. I mean, she is such an accomplished player. And then she got into coaching. She actually got injured, got into coaching after she had gotten injured. And she's been making sort of history, breaking down ceilings pretty much the entire time of her career. She was the first ever woman she was one of the only women, if not the only woman, who was coaching an academy, a boys' academy team when she was doing it with Werder Bremen, another German team. She then moved to Union Berlin. She became the first woman to ever be part of a coaching staff in the Champions League when Union Berlin made it to the Champions League in 2022. She was part of the staff that helped them get to that point. She was coaching Union Berlin's men's academies. I mean, she is such a phenomenal coach. She's known for her incredible communication skills, but also her technical and tactical sort of nous and acumen. People really just praise her for coaching. And so this has kind of been a long time coming In 2024, she actually took over for a very small interim period for Union Berlin as the men's head coach, about a 3-game period. But it didn't make the waves that it did then because she was genuinely just kind of basically like taking over before the next coach came in. Whereas this time, when Union Berlin in 2026 in April said she's going to be the head coach until the end of the season, there were 5 games that she had to take control of. And this was a huge, huge deal in football because, as any woman in football will tell you, you do not see women on the touchlines of first team men's football. It's very, very rare.
So why is this happening at Union Berlin? Kind of take us through the club side of the story.
Yeah, so Union Berlin are a really fascinating team. If you ask anyone who's ever supported this team, they will tell you that most of their existence has been tough. One of their best memories is just not getting relegated, and that's sort of enshrined in the club's stadium are these memories of them not getting relegated. So for a long time, this was not a club that really reached incredible heights, but it was a club that was incredibly supported by its fan base. It's had financial troubles. There's a really incredible story about. So if you go to the stadium, 3 of the 4 terraces were built by hand, by the hands of supporters, because there wasn't enough money for them to actually build the stadium. So all of those stone terraces were built by the hands of the supporters themselves. 2 years before then, supporters had donated blood in order to raise money to keep the club from going bankrupt. So literally blood, sweat, and tears has gone into this club. So that's just kind of the basis for it. And slowly but surely, Union Berlin on the men's side began to get success. And in 2019, they made it to the Bundesliga for the very first time. So they're in the top flight. They're getting loads of windfall. In 2022, they make it to the Champions League, which again, a huge windfall. And in German football, if people aren't familiar, the clubs are 51%, minimum 51% owned by the fans. So fans are very, very important when it comes to the direction of the club. The president of Union Berlin had kind of always been behind the scenes pushing for maybe some more support for the women's team, because as the men's team are going up and coming up through the ranks, getting to the Bundesliga, the women's team are operating as an amateur side. They're sort of playing in the 4th and 3rd tiers. They're playing on sort of a public pitch. They don't really have great facilities that they have access to and whatnot. President behind the scenes is saying, hey, maybe we should start to look at this differently. The 2019 World Cup in France kind of helps that. Bundesliga or reaching the Bundesliga 2019 helps that. But it was in 2022 when they reached the Champions League that the fans and the president really pushed this idea of, okay, we need to professionalize the women's setup. And I think that's really important that the fans were the ones that were really pushing this as well, because it means that from a supporters base, they wanted to see the club's new funding go towards helping the women. And so that's where this project for the women really starts, is in 2022. They say, okay, we're going to professionalize you. And I think too, culturally, people can need to really think about the context of that, because it can sound really late to the game that Union Berlin are getting into this, but let's think WSL in 2022 was not what it is as it is now. In 2018, Manchester United only created their women's team after having, gotten rid of it back in 2002, 2003. So again, this is kind of part of the cultural evolution of women's football in Europe. And so 2022 they professionalize. The next year they get promoted. The next year they get promoted to the Bundesliga too. And then as of last year, they were in the Frauen-Bundesliga for the very first time, and they finished 9th in their debut season in the top flight.
Let's go back to Eta a little bit. You mentioned she takes over for the men's team when the then coach was suspended for 3 games. Then in 2026, on a full interim basis, before she's named the head coach ahead of this season for the women's team. I want to go back to those moments, though, where she is managing a top 5 team, rather, as a woman. What was the reaction like from the fans and in Europe?
So it was very mixed. I mean, fans were on board with it because, like you said, she'd already done this previously, and anyone within Union Berlin will tell you she is more than qualified. And in fact, Eta would say that herself. She said that a lot of people, because I spoke to her while I was out there was a lot of surprise externally, and people couldn't believe that this was happening. And yet, if you think about sort of the natural order of what happens when a head coach is sacked, it's generally that either the assistant manager, or as it tends to be, the head coach of the youth team tends to take over on an interim basis. Well, Marie-Louise Eta was the head coach of the youth team, so it only kind of makes sense that she would do it. For those who haven't read the piece, because there is a piece, she was head coach of the under-19s, and in February, March, the club actually approached her to become the head coach of the women's team for this upcoming season. She had said yes after kind of a month of deliberation. That was around March. And then a month later, while she's still with under-19s, she then gets this offer to go and be the interim head coach. So that's how that happened. But yeah, there was, like I said, the reaction was mixed. There were quite a few sexist comments that were made in German punditry, particularly online. Actually, Union Berlin's own social media account had to kind of go after people and say, like, this is just not what we endorse. This is not how we do it. But Marie-Louise Eta, like, she sort of remained quiet in it. She remained just confident in herself. She just kept doing her job, which is very Marie-Louise Eta. She just does her job. She does it well. And as the interim period went on, I mean, she proved these people wrong. I thought Union Berlin and anyone who watched them, they started playing a completely different version of football. They were more attacking. They were more dynamic. She won 2 games, got a draw out of the 5 that they played, but the underlying stats were far better than anything they had been playing previously. They obviously didn't get relegated, and she definitely made a name for herself as one of the most exciting young coaches in Germany, men's or women's.
So this past weekend, she makes history in another way that we talked about, and you went there to follow her. Can you take us through these 4 days?
Yeah, so the 4 days leading up to it were really exciting. 'Cause I didn't kind of know what character I was going to meet. People talk about Marie-Louise Eta in so many different ways. Everyone calls her Louie. That's the nickname that she goes by. And for a woman who has had to deal with so many sexist comments, so many people sort of doubting her constantly, but a woman who was constantly breaking through barriers, I maybe was expecting someone just like very tough, very rigid, very kind of like externally hard, if you will, because that's the kind of thing that you have to be. And Marie-Louise Eta is like just one of the most approachable, amicable people you ever meet, sort of just off the pitch, very gregarious, very open. She's always laughing, always sort of wanting to get to know you. And that's what a lot of people say about her too, off the pitch, is that she's very curious and she wants to get to know her people, which is kind of maybe a different brand of coaching to what a lot of German coaches are like. So yeah, arrived on Wednesday, went straight to the training grounds, went to go and see her do training, got to meet her, sat down, we chatted a lot. We chatted through kind of her history, how she appreciated kind of the last couple months. And I think it was really interesting too, because she had even said, as her time as interim head coach kept going, there were conversations that were happening externally about, well, why doesn't she just take over the men's team permanently? She's doing so well. The players clearly like her.
Wow.
The hierarchy really, really liked her. Well, why don't we just do this? And the president of Union Berlin had actually come out during that time and said, regardless of the results that happen, it would be a disservice to suddenly move her away from the agreement that we already had with the women's team to then move her to the men's team. Like, what kind of message does that send? She's going to stay as head coach of the women's team. And we spoke about that quite a lot. And she had said, she had never for one time thought that she was going to leave the women's setup, that she was going to do the job that she was been told, and then she'd move on to the next job. But for her to do that, to maintain kind of that agreement, it meant that she wanted the club to also maintain its agreement of backing the women's team. So she was very sort of not forceful, but very full of conviction when we were talking about those kinds of things. And yeah, got to see her in training. Again, totally different person when she gets onto the pitch. She doesn't scream. She doesn't ever use a whistle. She doesn't yell. But her voice really carries in those moments on training. You players are watching her. They're seeing the way she's moving her body. She's all about fine details. Very hands-on in training, wants to kind of be making sure everyone's doing something. If she's, can constantly give advice to someone, she's going to be talking to someone, making sure that adjustments are being made. And then, yeah, Friday night was the game, which we'll get into. But yeah, it was a very nice couple of days to be spending with the club.
You have to think when you hear, would we keep her over at the men's side, that it's just a matter of time. But you also wonder, is the football world ready for that?
Yeah, and actually, I think a lot of people within the club on the women's side were nervous that maybe Union Berlin would be happy to be the ones that made the world have to be ready for that. Union Berlin have never been afraid to kind of push the envelope, if you will. Like they saw Marie-Louise Eta as a coach who is capable of doing the job. That's all they saw. It didn't matter that she was a woman or a man. It was, this is a coach that's able to do it. But the fact of the matter is she'd already agreed to be the head coach of the women's
Of
team,
course.
and Union Berlin are very serious about their women's project since that 2022 professionalization. They've brought in loads of players for the summer, some really high profile players as well, you German internationals, and they want to push on. And for them, Marie-Louise Eta is that next step in the evolution. And already having her as a head coach, it was hugely influential in the transfer market. They were able to kind of convince players to come in because it meant you're going to work with this head coach who is renowned, but is also just a very good developer of talent. And like, here's her resume, here's her CV. There are men's and women's players who adore her. So this is who you'll be able to work with. And for Union Berlin, I think it's a win-win, but especially for their women's team, it's a very bold signal to send to everyone that we see this as a head coach that is capable of doing both the men's and the women's senior team. And so we're going to give her to the women's, or commit her to the women's, because we believe in this women's setup and we want the best for it. And yeah, just a little bit more on that. Like, Union Berlin are currently building facilities, training facilities for their senior men's and women's team. It's on the same premise as the stadium. They're going to be sharing those facilities of complete equal for both men's and women's. That's a really big deal, especially in Germany. So this is a team that is committed and a club that is committed to their women's team.
That's exactly what I want to ask you about. For someone who's around the Premier League and the WSL so much, us here around MLS and the NWSL, how does the Bundesliga on the men's and the women's side stack up?
Yeah, so it's been in flux and it's definitely an evolution, but more and more so you're seeing the table for the Frauen-Bundesliga start to reflect and sort of mirror the Bundesliga
Mm.
in a way. That hasn't always been the case. In fact, most of Germany's sort of top teams were not backed by, or didn't have an equivalent sort of men's Bundesliga team, if you will. I mean, Turbine Potsdam was a team that Marie-Louise Eta actually played for, won the Champions League with. They're no longer sort of the top dog, but for a very long time over the last decade, that was a team that was a top dog. So German football is kind of starting to mirror English football in that way, that you're having kind of the Bundesliga/Premier League teams investing in their women's teams. That money is now letting them get up to the top flights, or their respective top flights. Dortmund is another one. They just brought in Alexander Popp, like German star Alexander Popp is on their team, and they're trying to get up to the Bundesliga, or Frauen-Bundesliga, if you will. But this is still a work in motion. It's still an evolutionary thing. I think what's really fascinating was that, in the same way that English women's football can reflect English men's football, German women's football reflected German men's football in the fan bases. Like, that Friday night game I thought was absolutely spectacular, in the sense that everyone was very, very invested in watching and engaging with the team. The pre-match chants were amazing, but there was no incentive to go, if you will. Like, the reason to go watch Union Berlin women was to go watch Union Berlin women. It was not because there was a panini sticker swap beforehand, or a face painting sort of station or whatever, or because at halftime there's going to be this Maracha band playing something, whatever. It was to go watch the team. And around Union Berlin Stadium, there are posters that have like a telephone with an X through it. So it says emotion, not telephone, like, do not take your phone out. And I think that's actually something that English women's football could potentially learn from, because it's not something that we tend to see. English women's football has convinced itself that in the Venn diagram of a club, you have men's supporters and women's supporters, but the center, there's not many men's supporters who also support the women's team. In Germany, that doesn't seem to really be the case. It seems to be there's more overlap, and that there's more of a sort of a connection to the club as a whole. And that was definitely the case with Union Berlin. And it was really encouraging, because I think there is this notion in England that you can't support the women's football team without having a reason to do so. Whereas the reason for supporting the women's football team at Union Berlin was, it's Union Berlin and we will support them.
You were around Etta for 4 days, um, talking to her. What stood out to you about your conversations with her in terms of the role that she sees for herself, any of that noise from the past around a woman being so successful, et cetera, et cetera? What stood out to you from your conversations?
She was very funny about it. Like she was laughing when I had to ask her, what was it like? Why, like, did it feel weird when all these people sort of descended upon this club to come and see you at your first press conference? And like I'd sort of mentioned earlier, she just sort of laughed and she said, yeah, she goes, really, like, it's normal. I'm the head coach of the under-19s. Of course I'm going to be the interim head coach. She goes, but oh my gosh, it's a woman. She goes, how dare it? 20th century, like, or 21st century. How can we do this? And so she was actually like quite humorous about it, which I thought was really incredible because I think after all these years, I mean, like I said, her track record of being the only woman in so many scenarios, it would tire you out at some point. I feel like I would get exasperated and I would start to probably lose a lot of patience. But she still got to see it with like a lot of positivity. She didn't approach it with that sort of exasperation that I think maybe I would have gotten to, which I thought was really great. But she also was just kind of fighting for football in general. Like she didn't go on some big sort of like feminist manifesto crusade where it was like, this is a terrible misogynistic world, blah, blah, where she 100% could have started to wail against this system. But instead, she really focused on like, this is what I do. This is my job. She's completely aware of how it's going to impact the wider world. But she's holding the club to the same account that she is. Like, I think a lot of times when we have women in these positions, we see them as the ones who are doing all the hard work. And Marie-Louise Eta sort of was putting a lot of the responsibility back on the club to say, like, well, you need to make it so that more women can follow me. You need to make sure that the standards across the board are the same for the men's and the women's team so that when it does come to her, like, making a decision who she wants to coach, it's a hard one. Like, she has to decide, actually, like, they're the same levels. Like, so I want to go coach the women's team because she was all about, like, I want to be able to coach at the highest position that I can. And for her right now, that is the women's team. She sees that as the highest that she can, despite having already been the interim manager of the men's senior team, which I think is a really, really big honor for Union Berlin. So yeah, like I said, she was just a phenomenal interview, very engaging, but also like very curious about me. Like she wanted to ask questions. She was constantly like, they said that we could only have 20 minutes. And then at one point it was like 25 minutes and the person had to come in. They were like, we really need to go. And she was like, wait, stop. I'm talking to her. And like, she is a very engaged person.
So Megan, take us inside of her debut, please. It's a home match against Bayern Munich.
Yeah, Bayern Munich, the reigning champions of Germany, sort of perennial champions of Germany. The 2 days before when I had been speaking to her, I'd said like, oh, what a game. Like, it's going to be such a good game. And she had said, yeah, I hope you're saying that after the full 90 minutes. And to be honest, I was saying it after the full 90 minutes. The scoreline is not as flattering for Union Berlin. They lost 4-1 to Bayern Munich. I think previous results should be noted. I think they lost 4-0 in the first time they played them last season in their sort of debut. And then the sort of second match that they played in the same season, they lost 3-2, but they were 2-2 until the 90th minute. Sucker punch sort of right at the end. But this game, like for the first 20 minutes, Union Berlin went after Bayern Munich, and they probably had the two best chances of the game 20 minutes in. And that was all of Marie-Louise Eta's goal. Like, she wants them to actually play football. And that's what the players had said. That's what the people at the club had said. Last season, it was kind of about survival, very defensive. Lisong Gra, who's their new summer signing from Eintracht Frankfurt, she had even said that playing against Union Berlin was nasty. Like, they didn't like it because it was just very defensive, very dogged, very awful. Whereas now, Marie-Louise Eta, she wants to play. She wants to have her team going forward. So they had chances, they missed them, and you can't miss your chances against Bayern Munich. And yeah, Bayern Munich end up putting in a free kick. It was wonderful. And so now they're 1-0 up. And then, yeah, slowly but surely, they start to kind of work their magic. They show individual brilliance. Eventually, they are 3-0 up, which is, quite sad for Union Berlin. But still, like, the fans are really behind them. And I think that's really important, too, as I'd spoken to some of the other players. And they had said, they cited these things called the Boon rules. And the Boon rules at Union Berlin, the 4 sort of diktats of how to be a Union Berlin fan. One of them is you never scapegoat a single player. You never leave early. You do not heckle your players. And then the 4th one is not really a rule. It's more of like sort of a thing, but it's like your hoarse voice is the same as the player's tired legs. So basically, don't stop singing is the whole thing. And one of the players had said that another sort of unspoken boon rule is if you try, you can't lose. So as long as you're giving it your all, you can't lose.
Aw, that's sweet.
And the fans got really behind them. They kept pushing them, and Marie-Louise Eta did what she needed to once they were sort of 3-0 down. It's about just before the 60th minute. She made all of her subs, or starts putting on attacking subs. Really wants to try to take the game to them. They start taking the game to them. They start making chances. When they scored their goal, it was 3-1. It was a really nice, really, really well-worked goal. I mean, the stadium just lit up. It was absolutely phenomenal. You could tell it meant the world to these fans to see their team honestly get a goal they deserved. They definitely didn't deserve a point, but they definitely deserved a goal. So it was wonderful to hear that. They ended up still losing 4-1 because they didn't take 2 more chances they had to make it 3-3, and Bayern Munich, as Bayern Munich do, score their one chance. So yeah, ended 4-1, courtesy of an injury time goal. But it was such an incredible atmosphere. 17,000 people in attendance for this Frauen-Bundesliga opener. It felt like a full house because the stadium only fits about 22,000. And Union Berlin do this amazing thing beforehand. They read out the entire list or the entire roster with each player. And after each player's name, the fans chant back, Göttinnen, or football Göttinnen, which means football goddess. They do the same thing for the men, but they refer to it as like football god. And when Marie-Louise Eta's name was called out, it was by far like the loudest that you heard it, and it was like piercing. And you could tell in that moment, like, there was so much belief in what this team was capable of doing, and just in Marie-Louise Eta herself and what she was going to do. So it was a phenomenal night. Despite the defeat, it still felt like they won something, which is just such a special thing to be a part of.
Let's talk about those players for a moment. What are their impressions of Eta?
Lisanne Graf, I think, is a perfect one to start with. She's a German international, came from Frankfurt. Frankfurt finished 3rd in the league last season. They were in the qualification stages for the Champions League. Like, she could have been part of that. And she decided to drop down to a team that finished 9th. Like, that is a huge, huge sign of Union Berlin, but mostly Marie-Louise Eta. And she had said that. She'd said she'd had conversations sort of with the director of football, with the club, but it was when she knew Marie-Louise Eta was going to be head coach, she gave her a call in the summer, that things progressed from there. So, like, that is the Marie-Louise Eta effect. And everyone had said she gets to know you as an individual. She respects you as a human, but then she also respects you as an athlete. And she's able to separate the two, but like not so that they're mutually exclusive. So she still sees you as a human, but then she still has demands of you as an athlete. And I think that's a really tricky balance sometimes for coaches to really hit. And everyone says that she can do it phenomenally well. Dina Orschmann, who is kind of a longtime player, she was there in the youth system, had to leave because she had ambitions and the club didn't match them, came back in 2022. She also said similar. She said, she just sees you for who you are. But in terms of her like technical and tactical ability, it's kind of unrivaled. They get onto the pitch and she is making the smallest adjustments to their game that they didn't even think about. And she's constantly thinking about football, constantly watching it. I know that's a sort of a cliche of managers, but in watching training myself, it just felt like she was constantly moving, but all of her movements were positive. Like, it didn't feel like she was getting in the way of the players, but she was kind of accentuating what they were doing and what they needed to do, without getting loud, without like kind of commandeering attention. And it was a very interesting dynamic to watch because, yeah, it's like she's not a big woman, like she's not a tall human being, but she carries herself in such a way that her presence is very easily identified as that is the head coach. And again, like for a woman in football, that is a very important thing to have.
Awesome stuff. Thank you so much, Megan. You can go read Megan's incredible feature. The Bundesliga's first female coach has taken over the women's team. Her club gave her many reasons to, over at The Athletic now. Listener, thank you so very much for hanging out with us as we kick off our week. Have a great one. We'll see you midweek as always, as that does it for us here today on Full Time. Want to get in touch with us? Please do. You can always email us at fulltime@theathletic.com or DM us over at TA Fulltime. Did you know The Athletic has partnered with Yahoo Sports to provide free best-in-class coverage of women's sports? Go check out the Women's Sports Hub, sports.yahoo.com/women's-sports. I'm Jillian Sakovits. Full Time was produced by Theo Lloyd Hughes. For more coverage, just head over to theathletic.com.